Fact-checked. Russia pushes nuclear claims to derail peace talks. Distract from war anniversary. Yeah, we're doing the war anniversary now. We are doing our war anniversary right now. On the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion, which I don't want to say celebrating, but we are in it right now. I mean, it's already to 25th here in Ukraine, but in the US, it's still the 24th. On the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion, Moscow accused France and the UK of seeking to provide Ukraine with nuclear arms. Well, I've missed the news. God, of course. That makes perfect sense that France and no, it does not. Okay, the West would never do such a thing. The West is far too afraid of nuclear escalation. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Okay, that is the stupidest accusation to date. To be quite honest with you, to be blunt. Yeah, clearly France and the UK want to provide Ukraine with nuclear arms. Clearly, they were hesitant to provide Ukraine with long-range missiles, but they were definitely provide Ukraine with nuclear bombs. Offering no evidence, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, SVR, claimed on February 24th that the British and French elite are helping Kyiv acquire nuclear weapons technology and delivery systems to secure more favorable terms in peace talks. Yeah, I don't buy that for a second. And if Russia had evidence, it would have provided it. This is a stupid claim. If Ukraine had nuclear weapons, and if it was truly provided with nuclear weapons, if with a viable amount of nuclear weapons, then the situation would completely change. It would not just be more favorable terms. That would be an understatement. But no, I will repeat that the UK and France will never do such a thing. Experts and officials who spoke to the Kyiv Independent dismissed the claims, framing them as an attempt to divert attention from the anniversary of the all-out war and to blame Kyiv for stalled peace talks. Yeah, of course that is the play here. It's obviously hogwash, said John Foreman, a security expert and former UK defense attaché in Moscow and Kyiv, pointing out that Russia has made a series of outlandish accusations in the past. For example, that Ukraine is developing a dirty bomb, which turned out to be bullshit as well, of course. There is no truth in this, a UK defense official told the Kyiv Independent. 4 years into a war, he thought he would win in a week. This is a desperate attempt by Russian President Vladimir Putin to distract from his failures. And you know what? I agree with that. I definitely agree with that sentiment. I have never heard anything more ridiculous than the claim that France and the UK want to equip Ukraine with nuclear bombs for better negotiation positions. Ukraine, which has relinquished Soviet-era nuclear arms stationed on its territory in accordance with the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, dismissed the accusation as absurd. Russia's accusations. I've not heard of this. I've not heard of these accusations. This is just insane. Russia's accusations. Russia's intelligence claimed that the UK and France, NATO's only two European nuclear powers, moved to provide Ukraine with nuclear weapons technology after concluding that Kyiv cannot defeat Russia on the battlefield, which is another subtle, by the way of Russia signaling that it's unbeatable. Okay, there are two angles to this. One is that the West is escalating on the nuclear ladder of escalation. Obviously, if France and the UK would provide Ukraine with nuclear weapons, that would be a huge escalation on the nuclear escalation ladder. But there's also the angle of saying that, yeah, the West has basically given up on the idea of Ukraine being able to defeat Russia on the battlefield. No matter what the West provides Ukraine with, it cannot win, and the West has realized that and has decided to provide nuclear weapons instead, which, by the way, is more true for Russia, if anything else. Russia is having very big trouble on the battlefield. Ukraine has reclaimed I believe, 300 square kilometers of territory recently. Russia is having big trouble to have significant gains using conventional weapons, using conventional means, and therefore it just goes to nuclear saber rattling. It goes to nuclear fear-mongering. Kyiv will be able to secure more favorable terms for ending the fighting if it possesses a nuclear bomb, or at least a so-called dirty bomb. The agency claimed. The SVR alleged that the delivery of a French TN-75 small-sized warhead from the M5 51.1 submarine launched ballistic missiles is under consideration. A completely nonsensical, completely unsubstantiated, as always, very predictably from Russia. It is a very predictable thing for Russia to do. Other Russian officials were quick to amplify the claim. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov called the alleged plot a flagrant violation of international law, which is comical coming from Russia. Russia talking about international law when it's convenient. Russia fear-mongering about international law when it is very happy that the international law-based order is being dismantled before our very own eyes. A charge that rings hollow given Russia's own nuclear threats and its violations of Ukraine's sovereignty and war crimes. Exactly. Dmitry Medvedev's Russia's former president, known as for his inflammatory rhetoric, warned that Moscow could launch nuclear strikes against Ukraine, the UK, and France if such transfer occurs. Yeah, sure. The drunk Medvedev. Nobody treats that guy seriously. Nobody treats the former president of the Russian Federation seriously. Everybody just treats him as a loud drunkard. The accusation was further disseminated on social media by accounts known for peddling pro-Russian narratives, including Cheibaus or Diana Panchenko. A disinformation monitoring team at the Let's Data tech company said malign actors broadly spread the claim on Russian language Telegram channels, framing UK and French leaders as reckless and desperate while seeking to evoke fears of a nuclear war and global instability, because that is basically the last refuge of the Russian Federation when it cannot win the war using its army, its military, its dwindling military. Distraction from the war anniversary. Foreman said the timing of the claim was no coincidence. The expert called it a counterblast for the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion, aimed at distracting from Moscow's responsibility by flooding the space with disinformation. The claim also aims at domestic Russian audiences, casting Ukraine as a dangerous proxy of the West, which has been the narrative from the very beginning, by the way. But one of the narratives. One of the narratives is connected to NATO, so Ukraine being a proxy of the West, that is a correct description of the Russian narrative. The other is denazification of Ukraine itself, so posing Ukraine as this dangerous Nazi country. And the third is, the most hilarious one, is Satanism, framing Ukraine as a satanic country, which is a thing. As Ukraine enters the 5th year of Russia's full-scale war, the Kremlin has acknowledged that its objectives remain unmet. So Russia kind of sort of admits that it has failed. The war was supposed to be over very soon. It was supposed to be a special military operation, but Russia has basically not managed to achieve anything. So it is forced to do this. A contrast to the early expectations of Russian officials and many Western experts who predicted a swift Russian victory. Oh boy. We're having the 4-year anniversary and no swift Russian victory in sight, which is why Russia has to resort to nuclear threats over and over and over again. Since late 2022, Russian forces have moved in an incremental pace on the battlefield while sustaining at least 200,000 killed and hundreds of thousands more wounded, the highest casualty rate Russia has suffered since World War II. I mean, it is the biggest war since World War II, but this is pathetic. The war was supposed to be finished in a few days. Russia has not achieved any of its objectives and now is depending on the United States to basically hand the victory over to Russia on a silver platter. That is Russia's last-ditch effort, counting on their biggest supporter, Trump, and also on nuclear warfare rhetoric to scare the West, because that has been sadly very effective. For the last 4 years, this has been actually unironically very effective. It has caused the West not to provide as much aid that it should to Ukraine because Europe and the United States have been terrified of nuclear escalation while allowing Russia to escalate endlessly, I might add. No, none of the European countries are willing to send any troops to support Ukraine because of said nuclear escalation. It's a very pathetic situation because in essence, in effect, Russia ends up having better allies than Ukraine. North Korea has been a better ally to Russia than the West because it has not only supplied Russia with weapons in large quantities, it has also supplied Russia with troops. None of the allies of Ukraine has supported Ukraine with troops. And also that is very interesting because there's this fear, if any country would supply Ukraine with troops, well, that would escalate things to nuclear. Well, okay, Russia has introduced foreign troops to this war, and there's been no equivalent response from the West. No equivalent response. It's pathetic. The West has been very, very lackluster throughout this conflict, and that is the direct reason why we are where we are. We could have been in a far better position when it comes to this war if the West would have taken the lead when it comes to nuclear escalation, as in when it would take dominance when it comes to the nuclear escalation ladder, and that is a thing, that is an actual term, nuclear escalation ladder, and if it would have provided Ukraine with at least the weapons that it needs. I'm not even talking about troops on the ground. If the West would have provided Ukraine with the amount of weapon that it needs and in a timely manner. 5 years into its 3-day war, Russia would really prefer you focus on French and British nukes, the French government said on social media. As US President Donald Trump's years-long effort to broker peace in Ukraine has failed to achieve a breakthrough, observers link Russia's latest allegations to the stalled negotiations, which, by the way, again, Trump is another thing in this whole equation. The fact that the United States has all but became allies of Russia, the fact that Trump was bragging about ending this war in 24 hours, and the 24 hours have extended into a year, over a year now. The fact that in reality, Trump does not want peace, Trump just wants business with Russia, and the war just happens to be in the way of that. It all compounds. It all compounds into the very bad situation that we are finding ourselves in now. And of course, it goes without saying that the situation is worse. The situation is worst for Ukraine. Even if we got peace, even if we got favorable peace for Ukraine right now, there is no good ending for Ukraine, I'm afraid. Ukraine will still have to mourn the dead. Ukraine will still have to rebuild. It's going to be a very devastating period for Ukraine, no matter how this war ends. All the people that have been fighting so far will have to deal, all of Ukrainian society will have to deal with the psychological impact of the war, something that is being so far pushed into the back by the fact that Ukraine has to focus on defending that Ukraine has to focus on surviving. It's a thing that will come to the forefront when the war ends. The psychological toll that this war is having on the populace as well as on the soldiers will really be felt when the war is over, and no sooner. As much as we are getting glimpses of that effect, it really will not come into play before the war ends. Marek Kov, a security expert at the Tallinn-based International Center for Defense and Security think tank, said the narrative aims primarily to influence the already relatively pro-Russian segment of opinion in the White House so that Washington puts even more pressure on Ukraine in peace negotiations. And interestingly enough, that is an understatement. Okay, relatively pro-Russian? No, it's not relatively pro-Russian. Trump is very openly pro-Russian, calling Vladimir Putin his friend. He has a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin. I believe he calls him at least once per week. They have great conversations. Vladimir Putin even promises him some things, like his infamous promise not to attack Kyiv for a week, which he has, of course, broken. That promise has been broken very quickly. And the pressure that Trump endlessly puts on Zelensky and Ukraine. Yuri Ushakov, a top Kremlin aide, has warned that the alleged weapons transfer plans would influence Moscow's position in peace talks and that Russia would brief Washington on the matter. Yeah, of course. That is another aspect to this. Russia wants to endlessly stall the negotiations and seeks for all sorts of excuses to influence its position, to change its position in the negotiations. Remember the made-up ploy to assassinate Putin? Remember that? When Russia said that during the negotiations, Ukraine attempted to assassinate Vladimir Putin, that also ended in Moscow shifting its position in negotiation talks. I wonder, this is very interesting that it seems like Russia seems to be finding one thing after the other that Ukraine is doing that allows Russia to just conveniently shift its positions in the peace negotiations. Isn't that very interesting timing as far as anybody can be concerned? Isn't that interesting? Russia has previously attempted to derail peace talks by blaming Ukraine for escalation. For example, there we go. The article says what I've mentioned just seconds ago, by accusing Ukrainian forces of striking one of Putin's residences in December. It is so obvious. It is so transparent. Russia is not being subtle with this. Also on February 24th, Putin alleged that Moscow has intelligence about possible attempts to sabotage the Turk Stream and Blue Stream gas pipelines in the Black Sea, warning such actions could derail peace talks. According to Kov, Russia may also be seeking to sway Washington against London and Paris. Trump has often accused European allies of disrupting his peace efforts by rejecting Russia's maximalist demands and calling for increased military support for Kyiv. If you needed evidence that Trump is pro-Russia, this is it. Blaming Europe for not agreeing to Russia's maximalist demands. At the same time, it is entirely clear that neither the United Kingdom nor France wants to provide nuclear weapons to Ukraine at this stage of the war, the experts stressed. I'm pretty sure that the United Kingdom nor France wants to provide nuclear weapons to Ukraine at any stage of the war, to be quite honest with you. I don't think any country will ever come to the conclusion that Ukraine should be armed with nuclear weapons. So there you go. The latest insane, unhinged claim by the Russian Federation that Europe is seeking to equip Ukraine with nuclear weapons.